everyone. Oh, sorry. Sorry, 1 second. China and the US. These are the two most powerful and important countries in the world today. And everyone loves to see a good fight. So these two countries are often pitted against each other. Let's look at the headlines from 10 years ago. The media has trained us into thinking that the world is a zero-sum game. If the US wins, then China loses. If China wins, then the US loses. This is the narrative that we've been sold because it's what sells magazines. It's what causes people to click into articles. 10 years later, the same story is still being told. This is the actual cover of Time magazine being sold in the United States this month. It says China won. You see, this idea of pitting the US against China makes it seem like there's two teams, a China team and a US team, and these companies are fighting, and there's only going to be one winner in transportation, one winner in e-commerce, one winner in social networking. But I question, is this framework of US versus China fighting head-on really the right framework to use at all? Is this world really a zero-sum game? I look at the companies on this list, and I think about what actually makes up a company anyways. You see, there's employees, there's customers, investors, manufacturers, and for large global companies, most of these constituents, these stakeholders, don't even sit in the same country. Let's take your employees. Designers, engineers, they might be in one country, but maybe your product and support team is elsewhere. For large global companies, increasingly their customers and users are around the world. It's actually extremely rare for a large global company to only have investors from one country. And most of manufacturing is still happening in Asia, particularly China. Let's look at a couple of examples. Apple, the Silicon Valley darling American technology company. I ask, how American of a company is Apple anyways? If you look at their employees, yes, they're designers, they're engineers, they are in California, they are in the US, but their product teams and their support teams are worldwide. Their customers are all over the world. In 2015, China was 29% of Apple's total global revenues. Their investors are worldwide, and we know that most of their manufacturing is done in Asia. Without China, the Apple iPhone would not exist. So how American of a company is Apple really? Let's look at another example. Volvo cars. This is my very first car, a Volvo. And I grew up thinking it was a Swedish brand. In 1999, Volvo cars was sold to Ford Motors. And in 2010, it was then sold to a Chinese company, Geely. And as of 2013, a bunch of Volvo cars are now manufactured in China. China is, in fact, the biggest market for Volvo cars, the most important country for Volvo cars today. And yet, when you ask consumers around the world, is Volvo a Chinese company? I think most people would say it's not. Let's look at Supercell, company based in Finland, the maker of Clash of Clans, the company, a game that is very big in pop culture, big in Western culture. If I talk to the users who actually play this game, who play Clash of Clans on a daily basis, I bet you the vast majority of them would not know that this company is owned by Tencent, a Chinese company listed in Hong Kong. So what I'm saying is that with globalization, with the internet, for large companies, it blurs the lines of what is a Chinese company or what is a US company. These companies in the long run are all going to be global companies. Let's look at two more fun examples. Musical.ly and Live.me. These companies are headquartered in China. Musical.ly's team is largely based in Shanghai. Live.me's team is largely based in Beijing. And yet their customers, their first market, was entirely USA. USA teenagers. And if you talk to the USA teenagers who are using Musical.ly and Live.me, most of them would not know that it's from a Chinese company. So this model where the company, the product, the engineers, the investors, they're all in China, but their target users are in the US, do you call this a Chinese company or a US company? It makes me wonder, does the origin of these companies matter? Is that maybe a way that we can label it China versus US? Well, I think in the long term that this label doesn't even make sense. Let's look at the automobile industry as an example. The Ford Model T, which took America by storm in the 1920s and changed forever the way the world thinks about car ownership, that was an American product. But decades later, we see all kinds of car brands on the market. Chinese brands, American brands, Japanese brands, Swedish brands, German brands. And it's because important inventions will always spread globally because customers want the best product, whether it's made in China or made in the USA, whether it's
Hi,
invented
ladies
in
and gentlemen.
China.
Thank you very much, Connie. In the meantime, we have important guests joining us in the house. 咁多位來賓，我哋歡迎啦香港特別行政區行政長官林鄭月娥女士，以及係阿里巴巴集團董事局主席馬雲先生進場。Just in time to catch Connie's speech, we have marching in Mrs. Carrie Lam Chang Yut-ngo, GBM GBS, Chief Executive of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and Mr. Jack Ma, Executive Chairman of Alibaba Group. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the House, we are hearing from Connie on a very important subject. So Connie, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So like I was saying, consumers today, they want the best product, regardless of whether or not it's a Chinese product or a US product. If I look at Alibaba Singles Day, last week they did an impressive $25 billion of GMV in sales in one day. But if you look at the top brands that sold in women's fashion, sports and outdoors, and footwear, they weren't Chinese brands. They were brands like Uniqlo, or Nike, or Adidas. And then if you want to confuse things even further, if you look at the products that these brands actually sell, the tags of these products will say, made in China, not made in the US. Large companies, large brands, even though they might be thought of as US brands or US companies, are actually global companies. Going global is where the future is at. Now, what does it mean to be going global, especially if you are a tech company? Cross-border business is incredibly difficult. For a US company going to China or a China company going to the US, it's difficult. Jack Ma is very well known for this quote, eBay may be a shark in the ocean, but I'm a crocodile in the Yangtze River. If we fight in the ocean, we lose. If we fight in the river, we win. You see, Jack knew over 10 years ago that he knew his local market better than his competitor. He would be able to hire better, he would be able to operate differently because he had a local advantage. Doing cross-border business is very difficult for both sides because very simple decisions take a long time to make. Even something as simple as where should I set up my headquarters? In Hong Kong terms, what's the difference between setting up my headquarters in Causeway Bay versus Discovery Bay? Will I attract different talent if I headquarter in Kowloon versus Central? These are questions that someone who is local to Hong Kong can answer, but very difficult for a foreigner to understand. When a US company tries to go to China, they have to learn what is a JV, what is a VIE, what is an ICP, what is a rep office, things they've never thought about before. And then the most important part of localizing your product. Today, you can no longer just translate the strings from English to Chinese or vice versa. That is no longer sufficient for localization. When US companies go to China, they are often faced with fierce competition that most of them are not prepared for, because in China, things move fast. The scale of 1.3 billion people means there are more startups, there's more competition. In China, it takes only on average 4 years for a company to become a unicorn. In the US, it's 7 years, and you see a huge spike in year number 2. Most US companies, when they do business in China, don't realize that it's like the Hunger Games out there. There's 20, 30 competitors, whereas in the US, there was only 1 or 2. Likewise, when Chinese companies come to the US, they face acceptance challenges as well. Last year, Meitu had a brief spike where it was popular in the US. Very quickly, bloggers and reporters started to attack it. And they said the servers are based in China. They said the app is asking for your GPS location. Can you trust this app? It makes me wonder if Musical.ly, if Live.me was first popular and big in China and then came to the US, would American teenagers have accepted it? Would reporters have the same kind of reaction to a Chinese company? Historically, there have been three approaches where tech companies have gone global. Largely, a lot of American companies have chosen the direct entry route, using their own brand and taking it to another country. Lots of Chinese companies have taken the acquisition route, where they'll acquire a team but largely leave it on its own. And more, you're going to start seeing US and Chinese companies alike take the investment route, taking a minority stake in a global partner and learning from each other. I'm here today, though, to tell you there's a fourth going global approach. And that's to explore the innovation and inspiration that comes with cross-border learnings. There are so many ways that we can learn from China and the US and take trends from one before they become popular in the other. Let's look at some of these lifestyle trends that are huge in the US. So many of these trends are fairly new to China if you think about it. Pets have become very popular in China in the last 5 to 10 years. Some people will estimate that this is now a $30 billion market in China. Fitness, yoga, road trips. I know people who are opening the Airbnb app in China just because they want to see Western interior design. And I know friends who get married in China, in addition to their red qipao, they will also buy a white wedding dress. My favorite example, rap and hip hop, which has been so core to American pop culture, is now taking China by storm. 30 years later. Last week at the Alibaba Singles Celebration, I saw those performances, and I'd say over half of them were rap or hip hop related. And yet that has been a trend that's been popular in the States for over 30 years. Likewise, if we look at product trends that are seeing product market fit very clearly in China, some of them are now starting to make their way slowly to the US. One of my favorite examples is QR codes. In August of this year, Venmo, a very popular P2P payment app in the US, launched QR codes, and they had this tagline: use QR codes to add a friend so that you can be sure that you're sending money to the right person. And I laughed when I saw that, because WeChat from day one encouraged people to use QR codes to add friends. And of course, in China, where there's 1.3 billion people, of course they would figure out that you can't just do a name search, because I'm going to get hundreds or thousands of results of people if I'm just typing in a name. And most people don't even use their actual faces for their profile photos. So of course China will figure out this problem faster than the US. Let's look at another case study: messaging platforms and how to incorporate businesses in them. WeChat launched its very first official account in April of 2012. 4 years later, Mark Zuckerberg launched messaging bots for businesses. 4 years later. And this is the Hong Kong advantage. You see, you in the audience, you have exposure to what's popular in the US. You have access to seeing what American lifestyle trends are like. And you know which ones have made it to China and which ones have not yet made it to China. Likewise, you know which products, market fits, and business models are doing incredibly well in China. And you can take those models to the US before the next Facebook or Google figures that out. You in the audience, you have a superpower. You can see the future. And you can act on that future and take this opportunity, because you realize that the US and China can actually learn from each other. There is so much cross-border inspiration that you can embrace. I will say, though, there is one area where there is very clear tension between the US and China, specifically for tech companies. And this particular area is around talent. Today, I do see a war for talent. And it's most obvious when I look in an area where there is a very scarce supply of resources, which is artificial intelligence. Many people will argue today that there are only a couple thousand people in the world that are capable of these expert breakthroughs in AI. And so Chinese companies are willing to pay a lot of money to hire the best talent from the States, and vice versa. In fact, Google has been known to pay up to $70 million for a single engineer working on their self-driving car project. But remember, again, these are people. People can move. And these people in the States can move to work for a Chinese company, and vice versa. In fact, I look at Stanford's PhD program focused on AI and computer science. Around half of them are Chinese. What happens if they all move back to China? And plus, if all these breakthroughs are happening in the academic world, once they publish these papers, well, those breakthroughs are now known to everyone. And the first company that commercializes it, that's the company that wins. So maybe even in this talent war, this US versus China construct, this artificial battle is not the right framework. So I go back to this original question, China versus the US. Are we partners or competitors? I don't believe the world is a zero-sum game. I believe with globalization and with the internet, both parties can win. In fact, if China is strong, it's great for the US. We have more customers to sell products to. And the same thing is true vice versa. If rap is going to be big in China, what are the fashion trends that come out of it? What are the music festival business models that come out of that? If all the pets were purchased 5 or 10 years ago, all of these pets are going to start needing veterinarian clinics, and they're all going to start needing pet insurance. There are so many business opportunities in the land of cross-border, and remember that you have a superpower because you can see the future. Spot the Western lifestyle trends that have not yet made it to China. Look for the China product, business model, and innovation that has not yet made it to the States. Seize that opportunity and embrace globalization. Thank you.